My apologies in advance. The video runs a little longer than I had planned. However, I wanted to be as detailed as I could in bringing you this information. All right, afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. And as you can see, we have a few ingredients on the counter, and today we're gonna do something different than what I usually do. I'm normally cooking something and preparing something on the stove, on the grill, or what have you, but today there's no smoke or fire or heat involved in what I'm gonna be doing today. So as you can see, we're gonna be making sea moss. I'm gonna go through the steps I use to blend up my own personal sea moss that I use. I have a bag of the golden type sea moss. There are 3 types of sea moss that I know of. There's the golden, also there's the purple, and there's also another one which is the green type of sea moss, which I don't have currently, but I will be getting some soon. And we're gonna be making a batch of the sea moss from the golden bag today. And here are a few ingredients that I'm gonna be using to make my sea moss that I like. First off, I start off with a triple rinse of natural spring water by itself. I usually do 3 rinses of the sea moss prior to starting the soak process. And in the soaking process, I use the Crystal Geyser, or should I say the Alpine spring water, which works well for me. I like it. And as I am soaking or rehydrating my sea moss, you need a lime. You take that lime and put it in the water with the sea moss, and the lime and the citrus from the lime actually helps pull the sea and salty taste out of your sea moss, and also put a little citrus back in to the flavor of the sea moss on the back end when you're consuming it. Also, after I get finished soaking my sea moss and when I start blending it down, I usually blend in some strawberries and pineapple, which helps with the taste because it's usually tasteless to me. But if you add in some fresh fruit, then you're adding taste plus healthy nutrients from fresh fruit. And last but not least, when I blend it, I usually use this Eternal Alkaline Spring Water. I use this when I blend my sea moss up for consumption. Let's get started with the first step, the rinsing process. And as I stated earlier, we're going with the golden colored sea moss. So let's see if we can make it do what it do. And I'll tell you, depending on how much sea moss you're gonna make, you don't wanna take out too much, or you don't wanna add too much, because once you start to soak your sea moss, it's gonna swell up to 3, maybe 4, maybe even 5 times the size of what's in here right now. So I got my amount of sea moss selected. Let's go ahead and start with my rinse waters. So let's go with the first one. And as I stated, I'm gonna do a triple rinse. And again, that's to get the initial salt and sandy texture off of the sea moss, and it also helps start the rehydration process. And as you can see, the water has turned real cloudy, foggy, and that's just getting, like I said, the sand and salt and all the good stuff, cleaning up your sea moss prior to starting the soak process. So this is rinse 1. And last but not least, on the triple rinse, number 3. And once you're done with the rinse, your water should be clear at the end of that. That lets you know you got all the salt and sand off of your sea moss prior to starting the soaking process. And Water looks pretty good here. That's a little cloud to it, but I think we pretty much got everything. So let me drain this and we're gonna start with phase 2. Phase 2, you go with your lime. And I like to cut these ends off, right? Get them out of the way. And you take your lime and just split it directly down the middle, right? Clean my counter. And with the first half of the lime, before you add your Alpine spring water, I go ahead and squeeze off any juices in there and kind of get that mixed in the moss first. And as you see, all the juice has been squeezed out of lime. You just throw that in there as well. Next step is when I bring in the Alpine spring water crystal geyser to start the soak process. Like I said, totally submerge your sea moss in the water. And then you take that second half of lime and you'll squeeze that juice into the water. Like I said, this is my process. I'm sure there's others out there that have different processes in how they make their sea moss. This is just mine. So, hey, everybody got a process. So we're gonna do what we do. And then you drop that in there and get your lime submerged in the sea moss. At this point, you start the soaking and rehydration process. Now you can soak your sea moss anywhere from 6 to about 36 hours, but I like to do mine for about 24 hours. And after that, it kind of seems like it starts to break down and have a different taste for me. Usually I do mine for 24 hours, and this is the process. There's also a process where you can use heated water to rehydrate your sea moss. It takes a shorter amount of time using that process. However, I don't use that process. I prefer to rehydrate mine using the cold method. You know, there is 2 methods, but again, my process, I prefer the cold method. And this is what we got. So at this point, I would get me a nice piece of saran wrap and cover this and leave it on the counter overnight and just let that sea moss rehydrate itself. We're back. So we're about midpoint through the soaking process, and as you can see, the sea moss has swelled up or rehydrated itself up to maybe 3 or 4 times the size that it was when I initially put it in the water. But at this point, what I normally do with my process is I'll go ahead and remove the limes because they have pretty much soaked up all of that they can absorb. And I personally think that they start to over citrus the flavor of the water. So what I'll do is remove the limes, drain this water, give it another fresh fill. And what I would do is rinse the sea moss once more. Okay, got a good rinse. Let's drain this water. So now that we've got that water drained, what I'll do here is again with my Alpine spring water, is submerge the sea moss once again, and then I'll let it continue to soak from this point forward until my 24-hour period is up. Let's go ahead and get us a fresh piece of saran wrap, put it back on the container, and finish the soaking process. So we're about to come down to the last stage of preparing the sea moss. And as you can see, again, it's still soaking in the Alpine spring water. So what we're gonna do now is go ahead and remove the saran wrap, and we're gonna drain the water. Now that we got our sea moss all drained and cleaned and rehydrated, let's go ahead and get the blender set up. Now you just take your sea moss and drop it straight in your blender. And at this point, I take my alkaline spring water, my Eternal, and you fill it with the water until you're about an inch from the top level of the sea moss. That should give you a pretty good amount of water for rehydration and mixing. And also at this point, this is where you add in your fresh strawberries and pineapple. These are some pretty good sized pieces of strawberry and pineapple, so probably should cut them up, but we're gonna go with the chunks and let the blender do what it does. So let's turn our blender on. All right, let's see how it is, because at this point you're gonna want to blend the sea moss up until it's about applesauce consistency. Okay, now at this point, I'll just go ahead and fill my jars. And as you can see, usually I make enough for about 2 to 3 weeks, depending on how much I eat per day. Like I said, that's pretty much the process. After this, you basically seal your sea moss. And I let it usually sit it on the counter, let it rest for about 20 minutes after I put it in the jar. And at that point, you can go ahead and put it in the refrigerator and keep it refrigerated. In the refrigerator, it usually lasts anywhere from about 2 to 3 weeks fresh. So yeah. Now you know what I know and how I do what I do. So until next time, hold it in the road. Out. You feel me?